Inflation. Major economies are dealing with it. Countries are scrambling to contain it. But Turkey's Erdogan has taken an unorthodox approach, one that has wrecked the country's economy. Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Radi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you stories and updates from West Asia. Our top story today is one that affects you and me. It is about soaring inflation. In Turkey, it is a 24-year high. But why? Our next report tells you.
78.62%. That was the annual rate of inflation in Turkey in June, the highest since 1998. This, combined with the plunging currency, means only one thing: a perfect economic disaster. Inflation has surged since last year in Turkey. For many, this is an unorthodox approach. Heralding it is the Turkey's Erdogan. The leader has called for patience. He says his approach will ultimately make Turkey less dependent. The Turkish leader is trying to fight spiraling inflation by bringing down borrowing costs, the exact opposite of what countries usually do in similar situations. It is an approach that has proven very costly, especially for the citizens. It has wiped out the value of people's savings, throwing swathes of the society below the official poverty line.
Of course, something like this has affected my life. I started to think about it 4 or 5 times when buying things. When making a plan, I feel like I lost my freedom, because before I could do whatever I wanted and go wherever I wanted. Now, while I'm planning these things, I think for a long time and have constant conversations about what to do or not to do. At this point, it also affects my psychology.
It affected my business quite a lot. This year, I'm not able to sell 20% or 10% of the product I was selling last year. This is because of the price increase. When the price of oil rises, this means cost, and this is reflected on the counter and in our work.
Being a doctor is definitely one of the most difficult professions in Turkey, because if we start economically, resident doctors earn below the poverty line, and this is not enough to even cover the rent of a house in Istanbul. We're trying to survive by taking on more night shifts.
The surging inflation has even changed Turkey's foreign policy. Ankara is turning to the same nations that it once clashed with. These are mainly the Gulf states. The most important is Saudi Arabia. Erdogan and MBS have clashed in the past over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, over the Muslim Brotherhood, and on who will lead the Muslim world. But Erdogan is ready to engage with MBS, because money speaks louder than ideologies. Erdogan has a frailing economy to deal with, so investments from rich Gulf neighbors seems like the only way out. Despite reaching a 24-year high, many expect the inflation rate to rise even further. Currently, Turkey is staring at many dire challenges. Its economy is at its weakest. Inflation is at the highest. There is public anger against Erdogan. The president is losing support with elections next year. So, the man who set out to head an Islamic caliphate is struggling to keep his empire. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
From Saudi Arabia to Iran, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, as usual, let's take a quick look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas publicly met with Ismail Haniyeh, the political chief of Hamas, for the first time in more than 5 years. The meeting took place in Algeria's capital as the pair were seen shaking hands. The United States has imposed new Iranian sanctions amid efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. U.S. measures targeting Iranian petroleum and petrochemical sales come ahead of Joe Biden's visit to the region next week. Yair Lapid meets French President Emmanuel Macron in his maiden trip as Israel's Prime Minister. Macron urged Lapid to revive talks with the Palestinians. Israel's army says it downed 3 Hezbollah drones on the way to its offshore gas field in the Mediterranean. This comes amid U.S. brokered negotiations between Israel and Lebanon over their maritime border. Lebanon plans to begin repatriating tens of thousands of Syrian refugees within months. Lebanon currently hosts an estimated 1.5 million Syrian refugees who have fled the war-torn nation. An explosion at an arms depot in Yemen's southern province of Abyan killed at least 3 people and wounded 18 others. The town is controlled by forces loyal to Yemen's internationally recognized government.
Shireen Abu Akleh. It is a name that is now synonymous to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Palestine says that the Israeli gunfire killed the trailblazing journalist. U.S. says it was probably the IDF gunfire that hit her. But Israel says they will continue the investigation. Now this comes as Shireen's news network, Al Jazeera, is taking the case to the International Criminal Court in Hague. We tell you more. Shireen Abu Akleh, a trailblazing Palestinian reporter, a known face in Arab media. An inspiration for Palestinian women.
We were standing here
and a journalist hailed by Palestinians across generations. Her killing was a shock to many and a reason of conflict for the region. Why? Because her death is mired in the Israel-Palestine conflict. There are several claims and counterclaims about how she died. The bulk of the evidence says it was IDF gunfire. This is what a Palestinian probe involving the bullet found.
Investigations, material evidence, oral evidence and technical reports have proven to us conclusively that the targeting of the martyr Abu Akleh on the group of journalists who were accompanying her by the occupying army was done directly and deliberately.
The U.S., on the other hand, said Shireen was likely killed by Israeli gunfire, but added that it was probably unintentional. According to the State Department, there was no definitive conclusion. U.S. authorities failed to identify the origin of the bullet that killed her. Palestinians are furious after the release of this U.S. report. They are calling it a biased investigation by an Israeli ally.
It's an understatement to say that we are disappointed, and in fact, the report was not comprehensive at all. It was not detailing the process of the investigation. Neither did it include information that we don't already know.
Meanwhile, Israel's version was very different and conflicting from the start. At first, they said it was a Palestinian gunman. Then, the Israeli military backtracked from its initial claim. They said they did not know which direction the fire came from. Now, they say they will continue investigating her killing.
The defense establishment is committed to uncovering the truth. In this specific case, despite the forensic investigation, it was not possible to reach a definitive conclusion. Unfortunately, it is not possible to determine the source of the shooting, and as such, the investigation will continue.
Shireen's news network, Al Jazeera, says it is now taking the case to the International Criminal Court. The case will soon be submitted to the ICC prosecutor in Hague. Journalists are protected under international law against direct attacks, so they are calling it a grave breach of the Geneva Convention. Shireen once said her life was shaped by the Israel-Palestine conflict. Her mother was born in West Jerusalem before the creation of Israel. She graduated from university the year the Oslo Peace Accords were signed, and she was an inspiration for Palestinian journalists in the region. Now, even in her death, she is shaping the same conflict that defined her life. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One. Hajj. Pilgrims from across the world are descending upon Saudi Arabia to perform what is now being called the biggest Hajj in the Covid era. Now, some are overjoyed, others are just happy to be back. In our next special report, we take you back in time to show you what Hajj looked like over the ages and what it means for Saudi Arabia and the Muslim world.
نسألك يا ربنا أن تلطف بنا وبعبادك الصالحين لطفا شاملا.
The Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. For Muslims around the world, it is a sacred pilgrimage. A once-in-a-lifetime duty for all able-bodied Muslims, if they can afford to perform the annual pilgrimage. Before the pandemic, millions of Muslims would take the Hajj every year. On an average, 2.5 million pilgrims would descend on Mecca, taking part in the 5-day-long rituals. But since 2020, it has been a very different Hajj. There are restrictions on the number of pilgrims, there are restrictions on foreigners entering the kingdom, and social distancing is a must for all. But this year, things are back to normal. This is the biggest Hajj since the pandemic began. 1 million pilgrims have descended in Saudi Arabia, packing Mecca's Grand Mosque for the largest Hajj in the Covid era.
As I saw the Kaaba, I felt like I was in heaven. It's amazing, so beautiful. May God accept my Hajj and that of all pilgrims.
For overseas pilgrims, it is a moment of joy. Some cried, some laughed. Others complained about their long journey. But seeing the Kaaba was an unbelievable feeling.
The Saudi government granted me and my family Hajj permits when it found out that I'm travelling from the UK to Mecca on foot. I met with my family in Medina after they arrived from the UK and we walked together to Mecca. I feel grateful to them.
For women, there were more reasons to rejoice. Women can now take the pilgrimage without a male guardian or a mahram. This comes as Saudi stares at a religious reset, one that is in line with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's 2030 vision.
No. No, women do not need to be accompanied by a male relative. Women are capable of handling themselves. Any educated woman, Tunisian women included, can go out on their own. There's no problem with that.
Millions of Muslims descend on Saudi Arabia for Hajj every year. Scenes filmed decades ago still largely reflect what happens today. The pilgrims are clothed in the ihram clothes. They are special clothes without finery or stitches, a way to equalize the rich and poor before God. Getting to Hajj is not always easy, especially amid war and political unrest. Since the 1990 Gulf War, many Iraqis have complained of difficulty in performing Hajj. Many Iraqis were seen boarding coaches, all to make the 4-day journey through the desert heat. In 2002, at the Kabul airport, pilgrims from Afghanistan were desperate. They wanted to perform the pilgrimage. Many had been camped outside the airport for days, all in the hope of getting on a flight. But many of these promised flights failed to materialize, leading to scenes of chaos at the airport. The 2015 Hajj was hit by double tragedy. First, a crane collapsed, killing more than 100 people. Then a stampede in Mina led to the deaths of 2,400 pilgrims. Hosting the Hajj is a matter of prestige for Saudi rulers. They are the custodians of Islam's holiest sites. For them, it is their most powerful source of political legitimacy, using religious soft power to cement their supremacy. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Democracy. This has always been an elusive goal for the region. There have been wars for it. There have been protests for it. People died for it. But does the Arab world really want a democracy? And what do citizens here prefer? A stable economy or a democracy? We bring you this story.
In 2011, citizens across West Asia took to the streets. The demands were for more representative governments, social justice and economic reforms. In the Arab world, protest movements toppled dictators who had ruled for decades. Authoritarian regimes were rattled as never before. The Arab Spring captured imaginations across West Asia, challenging long-held assumptions about its political culture. But within just a few years, hope gave way to despair. The old order came roaring back, some even more repressive than before. That outcome, however, did not answer one underlying question, which is, does the Arab world truly want a democracy? A recent survey tried to find out an answer for that. So what did it show? Arabs are now slowly losing faith in democracy. They think it cannot deliver a stable economy. So they are choosing economic stability over democracy. In Iraq, 75% believe economy is weak under a democracy. In Palestine and Jordan, over 50% people think so. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, the number was around 50%. So does the form of government even matter? Apparently not so much. People are more interested in having an effective government. They are not concerned with what form it is in. In Iraq, 79% don't care about the form of the government. In Jordan, the number was 76%. In Lebanon, it was around 69%. They believe the country needs a leader who can bend rules to get things done. So the preference is for a strong leader. In Iraq, over 87% want a strong leader. Only 13% disagree. Similarly, in Lebanon, 73% want a strong leader. Most of these nations have a bleak economic outlook. So it is no surprise that people are choosing economy over politics. But it is stark how far West Asia has come since the Arab Spring. The fire has since died. All people want now is food on their plates and to afford basic necessities. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Women in West Asia are breaking the glass ceiling. They are venturing out, running businesses. But what they need now is support, like this woman in Iran. Iran's oldest pistachio trader will now hand over the business to his daughter. breaking the traditions in a trade highly dominated by men. Let's take a look.
Tucked away in Tehran's Grand Bazaar, Iran's oldest pistachio wholesaler prepares a small revolution. Quietly but steadily, he will hand his business to his youngest daughter, breaking years of tradition in a trade dominated by men. Abbas Imami first began working at the age of 15. More than 7 decades on, bags of pistachios at the family shop are iconic. They are emblazoned with the slogan, "Over a century of experience." Imam is now transferring his expertise to his daughter. The 50-year-old will take over his firm, Shams Roasted Nuts.
I worked during the day and studied at night. It took me 10 years to learn the secrets of the trade, and I am now in the process of transferring them to my daughter. It is not an easy trade, but she will learn.
Iran is one of the top 3 global consumers of pistachios, so the trade is part of the country's history. Imam is reluctant to divulge too much. He does not want to tell us how he is passing on the business to Marjan. But the transition will break a few glass ceilings in the trade.
It is very difficult to manage this trade. Sourcing the product at the right price is not easy. It's crucial also to monitor processing, hygiene and storage.
It comes at a time when Arab women mean business, but they don't have the luxury to fail. Their pitches are subject to greater interrogation, and they have to fight harder to prove their worth in a male-dominated world. But if women aren't backed in business, West Asia could lose a lot. It could miss out on potential economic activity and prosperity that it needs. Currently, women entrepreneurs are undeterred. This comes as the region's economy picks up pace. But as they hustle, what they need is support. Support to shatter more glass ceilings in West Asia. West Asia Bureau. WION. World is one.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. We will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Radi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION. World is one.